I want to talk now a little bit about minimum wage. This is one of those perennial issues that just always comes cropping up, no matter how many times it gets addressed. I've talked about it before, others have talked about it before. It should be a fairly simple topic, but it's not. I'm bringing it up because I was reading an article by a progressive about why Ron Paul is not a good idea for progressives, that they should not support him in any way. He's basically evil. And they listed just a list of his positions. Basically, of course, they're right. Ron Paul is absolutely antithetical to the progressive agenda. It's statism, it's socialism, and they listed a whole bunch of things. And basically, every one of them was ridiculous and absurd, and demonstrated the complete ignorance of reality. Basically, that unfortunately afflicts pretty much all liberals to one degree or another. And one of the things was he's against minimum wages, which of course means he hates the poor and minorities and loves fat cats. Now, the argument is that absent minimum wages, all of us would be working for basically nothing, long hours, and horrible conditions for $1 a day or whatever. And this is just so blatantly false. If government mandated minimums were the only thing that caused wages to rise, then nobody would make more than government mandated minimums, aka minimum wage. There's no government mandate that CEOs get paid that much. There's no government mandate that doctors get paid so much. There's no government mandate that anybody gets paid above minimum wage that I'm aware of. Maybe there's a couple exceptions, but the vast majority of the labor force makes more than minimum wage. And so you need to have some kind of ability to explain that better than it's government dictates that make wages go up. This is, of course, silly. It's not true. It's obviously false. I've asked socialists about this before, and the only answer I've ever gotten, usually they just never answer, but they've said, well, maybe that just proves that some capitalists and employers are nice and are willing to pay more just because they're nice. No, and that's kind of an ironic argument to hear from somebody who typically says that all employers and all capitalists are inherently evil and the system is inherently exploitative, and we should abolish it because it's so evil, and then to turn around and say, well, 90% of them are actually nice and pay more than minimum wage just because they're nice guys. I'm sure some of them are nice guys, but that's not the reason that some people make more. Obviously, it's because wages are bid up because there's competition for labor, and there's marginal utility to each, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go over it all here. But I wanted to kind of use an analogy, though. I come at it from more of a civil libertarian self-fulfillment kind of angle. Now, there's always a problem with using analogies. They're never perfect. And they sometimes illustrate a principle, but they don't necessarily explain a principle, which is something that's usually good to try and do. But I wanted to talk about minimum wage as it relates to athletics. Pro athletes in the main sports make a lot of money. I think sometimes this is overstated because they don't all make super huge tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not sure there are any who make hundreds of millions of dollars, at least directly in a single year. I know there's some who've made more than that over their careers, maybe when you add up all their endorsements, but I don't know if there are that many who make that much as a wage. But over $1 million a year is not uncommon in most of the major sports. I think in hockey that's a little high. I think in hockey the average is less than $1 million, or at least it was until relatively recently. For football, baseball, and basketball, I think it's probably, the average is probably over $1 million. Again, I might be overstating that because I know sometimes they only make several hundred thousands of dollars. And they actually usually have league minimums. There's usually unions, and they mandate a certain amount. And I don't know that much about it. I'm not a sports aficionado. When I read the book on Pat Tillman, he actually made the very minimum for a while, and they kind of went into the pay scale. And it was interesting because he was making, I think, $200,000 a year. And after his rookie year, after maybe 1 or 2 years, another team really liked what they saw in him and offered him $10 million. So literally 100 times increase. And I mean, this is a guy who drove in a minivan still. He was a pro football player for the St. Louis Cardinals, and not St. Louis, the Cardinals in Arizona. I don't remember what town. And he turned it down. He said he was happy where he was. And then, of course, he turned it all down to join the government. That's a whole other story. I should make a video just about him. But uh, look, when I was in high school and just in college, especially among guys, not as much among girls, a lot of kids kind of imagine that they're going to be pro athletes. And they want to be pro athletes to one degree or another, some of them more seriously than others. It's a lifestyle for whatever reason they want, and they want to get paid for it, and they have an interest in it. And for many of them, that interest would be perfectly legitimate to term a love for the sport and an intense desire to play a sport professionally. And the truth is that almost none of them ever will play pro athletics. And if they do, the majority of them will not be playing in the main leagues making huge amounts of money. It's a little convoluted. It's different for all the sports, but they pretty much all have lower, less remunerative, less competitive leagues that you do get paid for, but very often it's not a great deal. It's really common for a lot of those teams that you'll be put up in a house, so you kind of get room and board, most either free or subsidized, and then you'll get a pittance, a little bit of a paycheck. I know of one of the towns I like in Iceland a lot, where I know a lot of people there. They have a basketball team, a pro basketball team, and they actually have a lot of foreigners, a lot of Americans who, maybe played Division II or Division III in college. They really like it. They want to keep going, but for whatever reason, they're just not so great that they're going to get hired by, the Bulls or the Lakers, and so they end up either in a European league, or this, I guess you'd call an Icelandic league a European league, but there'd be like a backwater European league, and they're not making very much money. They're not living the big bucks. They're not going out buying Hummers. They're not getting deals from Nike. If they're lucky, they might get like free pizza from the local pizza place if they do a TV spot on the local station or something. But they're not rolling in tons of dough. And the expectation when they're kids, when they're imagining, which I assume a lot of them did, that they're going to be the top of the heap, famous on ESPN every day, blah blah blah. And the reality is very stark. There's a huge difference between the top earners and the people who are actually professionals. They are making money, but they're at the bottom. The people in, I don't know, AAA or AA baseball or single A baseball or whatnot. And if I was a liberal progressive, if I applied the same reasoning that they use to justify minimum wages, about the dignity of the worker and of a living wage or whatever, this is an abhorrent and disgusting situation that needs to be rectified as soon as possible. I can make a very plausibly sounding argument that for someone to have dreams that they're going to be famous, that they're going to be multimillionaire, that they're going to be show me the money, all that, live in a mansion with a sports car and whatever, all the accoutrements that they imagined as a child that they would get by being a pro athlete, to not have those things, to be instead have something many orders of magnitudes less, at least in terms of material compensation, which I'll come to that and back to that in a minute, is demeaning. That it's unfair, that it's an insult to their humanity, and that the solution to this, obviously, is that there should be a minimum wage, and that wage should be, I don't know, $1 million a year. That all pro athletes should make $1 million a year. At the very least, then they will, because a lot of them are actually quite poor. I mean, if you look at the type of remuneration that they get, it's maybe subsidized room and board, and then a pittance after that. Again, depends on the sport and on which league or whatever, the details, but it's not very much. And as they go higher, it gets better and better. And there's some, you don't have to be in the best league to make a living, to retire on maybe, but you're not going to be a fabulously wealthy person. You know, you're not going to have, or at least not just because of your wage slavery. I mean, if you could be wealthy in other ways, I mean, obviously, but uh, anyway, it's not fair that only some people make all this money. You know, the only reason the big athletes make that much more money is because they're in bigger markets and because more people watch their television, and that's not really that big of a deal. And maybe, I mean, it's they only get paid more because they're naturally better at it. Because let's face it, some people are taller or faster, or maybe have better eye-hand coordination, or maybe there were social factors that led them to be better at it. So if they grew up in the inner city or whatever, playing street ball, I guess, or if they grew up, I mean, I know that there's schools in Texas and towns in Texas where football is basically a religion, and any kids who grow up there are just indoctrinated into it and immersed in it in a way that was certainly not the case where I was from, where it was kind of just, oh, like a club you did in high school. And so they have an unfair advantage, and it's just not right that because they all love it, they all love the game, and they're all entitled to the same amount of money. And if they like what they're doing, who cares how much they make? So it's just not fair that some of them who love it just as much as someone who loves the game just as much as LeBron James or Kobe Bryant shouldn't be relegated to making $500 a month playing on a league in Sticky Solmer in Iceland. That's just not right. And so we should have a minimum wage, and based on the irrationality of the liberal, that could be $1 million a year, but hell, who cares how much money is printed? It doesn't matter, right? So how about just $10 million a year? And that argument is very plausible as far as the logic of minimum wage goes. Hell, well, just giving all these people a raise, they'll all be richer, and then of course they'll help the economy because they'll go out and spend all their money on bling or whatever, and on nice houses and buying nice stereo equipment, and then they'll have more fulfilled lives. And it's demeaning that they would be in a situation where they're making so much less than other people in the industry. And so this would alleviate that. They're all getting paid the same, or at least a minimum that's a very nice minimum. And obviously they would favor this. I mean, if we took a vote among all the baseball players in Division A, B, and C, or A, AA, AAA, or all the minor league hockey players, and you said, well, you want to get paid $1 million a year, then of course I'll be for it. So that would prove that it's a good idea. But this does not comport to reality at all. The government could pass such a law. It's the government. They have a legislative monopoly. They have the arrogance and the conceit to pretty much think that everything's in their purview. The arguments that I just made, as absurd and wrong as they are actually persuasive to socialists and liberals and progressives. If they're not persuasive, they're totally compelling, or even completely obvious and matter of fact, common sense even. So it is plausible to say this could happen. I'm not predicting that it's going to, but let's say that it did, which again is not out of the realm of possibility. What would happen? Well, the reason that people make less, the wages of workers is determined by the subjective value that the consumers of whatever it is they produce are willing to pay for it. If you produce something that people really value highly enough that they are willing to part with a large amount of money to get it, you are going to get a big percentage of that money, whether you're being employed directly by them or indirectly through some kind of employer. So if people really, really, really want to watch you play basketball, presumably because you're good at it and it's fun to watch you, but there could be other reasons, then they will pay a lot of money to buy tickets to watch you. They will pay a lot of money for merchandise bearing your name. They will watch you when you're on TV a great deal, which will indirectly allow the TV company to charge more for advertising, which indeed will mean they can pay more for the contract to even broadcast you in the first place. And so your wage could be very high. But not every player is that valuable. A lot of people won't pay very much to watch a ticket if you're not that good, or they won't be willing to watch that much if they see you on television. And so the result is that in the lesser markets, they can't possibly afford to pay their workers that much. If you have a team that only generates, say, $1 million in revenue a month, they can't pay all whatever 12, however many players they have, $1 million a month. They can only pay them the after everything else is paid. They might only have $10,000 to split, and so they might only be able to pay 20 players $500 a month. And to tell them that now they got to pay $50 million, that doesn't mean they get a raise. That means that they don't have a job anymore. That means that that franchise is done. They can't give a raise. They'll go out of business otherwise. And so they just have to stop having the team. Now, this is bad all around. It's bad for the consumers. Get the sun out of your eye. Not everyone is in a position to be going to a major ballpark or a major venue all the time. They might not have the money. They might not have the interest. They might not want to drive hundreds or even thousands of miles to get to one. And so something that's not as good but more available is a perfectly good substitute. That'll be gone. You won't be able to go to the minor league games. Again, sometimes these can be very popular in small towns and small venues. That's the only thing going. Like that little town in Iceland. They can't. I mean, Iceland's too small a place to have like a major league of its own or anything like that. And if it did, it couldn't. It was very unlikely that it'd be able to compete with its much more populous, rich European neighbors. And so you have a league within Iceland, and it's just not very big. But it's the only thing going on in a small town, so that'd be fine. But if they told they had to pay all the players, $100,000 a week or whatever, then there just would be nothing to go see. So there's that. Then, of course, there's the players. Now they've gone from they're pursuing something that they love, or that at least they think is the best place for them to be. Maybe holding out the hope that someday they will be on a better team, making more. Again, this is statistically difficult, but it does happen. And to tell them basically that, well, now you're going to get paid $1 million. They're not going to get paid $1 million. They're going to be unemployed. And perfect with the analogy that Walter Williams uses, the bottom rungs of the ladder that go to where they want to go are gone. Anybody who does not get picked up right out of high school because they're the most phenomenal player ever is basically screwed completely. Or a great college player. There is absolutely no feasible, likely possibility of making it into where you want to go when all the lesser venues are priced out of existence, which is exactly what such a minimum wage would do. And what it does in real life. Nobody wants to, as their ambition, work at sweeping the floor at some restaurant or washing dishes. But they will do it if they think that after a while they can get a better job. And to just spit on them and say, no, that's not good enough for you. You deserve something so much better that they aren't qualified to do at this point, then they'll never even get to that point. If people I've known a lot of people who do play sports just at a club level, and if they like it and they don't even get paid, who's to argue? How could someone say that the team, the softball team that you play on or the hockey league you play on, it's so much less than the national or the pro teams that it's just demeaning that you even take part. Who the fuck are you to tell you whether they like it or not enough to take part? Nobody. And if they got paid a little bit of money on the side because they were doing it, good for them. That's nothing to complain about and say that's not enough. They shouldn't be permitted to exert themselves in such a way without a certain amount of remuneration because it doesn't conform to my sensibilities. This is why liberals are so hubristic and conceited, I think. And they don't realize that they are. They think that they're just lending a helping hand, but what they're really saying is, I know better for you than you do. I mean, categorically. And it's just disgusting and sick, and it's also completely stupid. But that's where we're at.